The morning sun climbed up the sky, casting long shadows over the crumbling chimneys dotted around Willowbrook. Daniel Foster leaned against a ladder, mopping the sweat from his forehead with the back of his sleeve. His hands, coarse from years of mixing mortar and tar, traced the outline of a brick flue that served the Morrison household for more than 6 decades. At 28, Danny had been working on his father's business for 12 years. His father's words, urging him to finish the job, rang in his ears with every brick laid and every crack sealed. Not until his father's heart was sound and steady. Danny wiped a streak of soot from the corner of his eyes, his tired gaze following the flight of the morning sparrow, vanishing behind the rooftops into the horizon. Danny hopped off the ladder and shoved his tools into the back of his rusty pickup, his movements brisk and purposeful. He was to meet his father at the Willowbrook General Hospital for another round of examinations. Danny had attended every single hearing, every procedure, and every test. His mother's voice echoed in his head. She had raised him to be a proud and strong man, no matter how empty his pockets were. No matter how torn his overalls and workman's blouse were, he would never stoop to begging. He shifted uneasily in the back seat of the car, clutching the plastic-wrapped bundle of his father's medical records close to his chest. The hospital lobby buzzed with a steady flow of patients and nurses making their rounds, dispensing advice and medication. Danny's gaze followed the neon-lit signs overhead: emergency, pharmacy, and a blue arrow leading to imaging. He knew the hospital grounds by heart. Suddenly, heavy footsteps announced the arrival of a new visitor. The automatic doors slid open, letting in a sudden blast of cold air. Victoria Sterling swept past the waiting area like the owner of the establishment, which she was to be in a matter of days. The red silk of her evening dress shimmered and flowed as she moved, catching the light from the neon hospital signs. Her expensive gold necklace mirrored her sharply carved cheekbones. Her stiletto heels clicked like a metronome, counting every heartbeat. Flanking her on either side were 2 sharply dressed men. One was her favorite property dealer, Mr. Harrison, the other unknown to Danny. Danny moved aside to let the woman pass, his muddy boots sliding on the linoleum floor. Victoria turned at the sound of his voice, her pale blue eyes narrowing as they raked up and down his person. Her lips curled in a sneer at the sight of his dirty overalls and his weather-beaten workman's blouse. "Foster," she drawled, her voice as coarse as the brickwork he had spent the last decade repairing. "The chimney boy who has been chasing all my would-be buyers away." Danny swallowed hard, his heart hammering against his ribs. "I am Daniel Foster, at your service, madam. I repair chimneys and kindly remind those who wish to sell their dearly beloved houses that they will not receive 1 penny from your company." Victoria laughed, a brittle, icy sound that made the hairs on the back of his neck prickle. "Chimneys," she repeated, shaking her head. "Chimneys and the piles of rotting lumber that have been their undeserving accompaniment for centuries." She turned her nose up at him. "Progress is coming to this dump, and you, my good man, are only a minuscule cog in the wheel of history. My company will bring jobs, revenue, and prosperity to the town. You, on the other hand, will soon be a distant footnote in local history." Her smile was as thin as the gold thread that trimmed her neckline. "Chimneys are for people who live in the past." Daniel's jaw tightened. "My father built more chimneys in this town than anyone else ever has," he said grimly. "And now they all stand proud and tall, reaching for the sky." "History is for the poor," Victoria said, turning on her heel. "They cannot invest in the future." She walked away, her laughter floating down the tiled hall, and long, polished legs disappearing around the corner at the end of the corridor. Danny stood motionless in the center of the floor, his grip white-knuckled around the plastic-wrapped bundle of his father's medical records. Unseen by Victoria Sterling was the simmering fire in the young man's chest, the fire that would one day consume the woman. 3 days later, the news of Danny's confrontation in the hospital made its way to Victoria's office. The chimney boy, it seemed, continued to harass her would-be buyers. Twice already, she had lost sizable real estate deals due to the man's persistent nagging. Twice she had suffered a $2 million loss. It took all of Victoria's self-possession not to storm the hospital straight away. The last thing she needed was for her enemies to think she was easy prey. She finally arrived at the hospital's entrance in the early afternoon hours, her red silk dress hugging her slender waist, her designer stilettos clicking like a metronome. The words she prepared to hurl at the unsuspecting Danny Foster were still burning behind her pursed lips when she spotted the young man standing by the pharmacy counter. Danny held a prescription slip in his hands, his dark hair sticking to his forehead with dampness. He looked ashen and haggard, his face ashen with fatigue. His blue workman's blouse was buttoned to the collar, his sleeves rolled to his elbows. He turned at the sound of Victoria's heels, his expression one of surprise morphing into something akin to dread as he took in her sharply tailored figure. "Danny," Victoria purred, her voice dripping with honeyed sarcasm. "I believe we have not been properly introduced." Her heels stopped a foot away from where he stood, her designer dress rustling as she came to a halt. "I am Victoria Sterling, and I am the woman who is going to buy your precious town and turn it upside down." Danny tensed visibly but said nothing. He held Victoria's gaze, his heart hammering furiously behind his ribs. "Is there something you would like to say to me, Daniel Foster?" Victoria asked, her smile curving into a sneer. "Perhaps you believe yourself to be some sort of hero for continuing to harass my buyers." Danny hesitated, his throat constricting around the sudden swell of emotions. "I am Daniel Foster, and I have dedicated my life to ensuring that this town is safe and healthy for its residents," he said finally, his voice coming out as little more than a whisper. "I believe it is in your best interest not to interfere with my work." Victoria's laughter rang out like broken glass. "I believe we have a fundamental disagreement of epic proportions," she said, her eyes narrowing. "You see, my dear boy, I have invested millions of dollars in this project, and I have no intention of walking away from it because of a few insignificant setbacks." Danny turned to leave, but Victoria caught his arm. Her fingers dug into his flesh, her manicured nails digging into the worn material of his workman's blouse. "You do not understand the gravity of the situation," she said, leaning in close so that her words were barely louder than a whisper. "You are playing with fire, Daniel Foster. A fire that will consume you whole." Danny wrenched himself free of her grasp. "If you think I am afraid of you, you are sorely mistaken," he said, his voice steady. "I will not be intimidated by a woman who thinks she can buy her way into this town." Victoria's laugh was a sound of pure disdain. "Oh, you will be," she said, her eyes gleaming with malice. "In fact, I believe I will enjoy tearing you apart, piece by piece." Without warning, she grabbed the front of Danny's workman's blouse and yanked it open. The material tore with a sound like ripping silk, revealing the soft white cotton of his undershirt. Danny's heart thundered in his chest as her fingers raked down his sides, tearing the shirt from his collarbones and down to his waist. A hush of shocked murmurs rippled through the waiting room as the sight of the young man's bare stomach drew a collective gasp from the assembled nurses and patients. The pharmacy sign blinked overhead, but no one was paying attention. The blue arrow, leading to the imaging department, seemed to point accusing fingers at the young man. "I believe this will serve as quite the inspiration to my workers," Victoria said, her lips curling into a smile as she took in the sight of the torn shirt. After all, they should learn to fear those who would stand in the way of progress. She released the torn material and stepped back, her expensive dress not a shred out of place. Danny stood motionless in the center of it all, his heart pounding furiously behind his ribs. He could feel dozens of pairs of eyes on him, but his gaze was fixed on the emergency sign overhead. He took a steadying breath and reached for the torn shirt, his fingers brushing against the coarse fabric. "I believe the last thing they saw was a man in a torn shirt and a broken spirit," Danny said quietly. He glanced up at the sign, the word emergency glowing ominously. He pushed himself upright, his heart hammering against his ribs. "But I believe they will soon witness something far more powerful." And with that, he turned to face Victoria Sterling, a new determination burning in his chest.